welcome to the first Func Prog Sweden this year. We're super thrilled that we are finally back and we're getting started. Before we kick off this first meetup, I would like to recap the last year. We actually did 11 online meetups last year and we had 24 presentations in these 11 meetups. And amazingly enough, people have watched over 8,000 hours of functional programming in this channel. So with that, I would like to say and thanks to all viewers, watchers, to presenters. Thanks for coming and supporting us. Thanks for sharing and joining in today also. With that said, let's get started with the agenda. So first it's me, of course, Magnus. I'm doing introduction, etc. Then we'll hand over to Ben, and he will do Purescript for Haskellers. And after that, we'll do orthotopy. I think I got it right, or not. Apple-inspired arrays for Haskell by Lennart Augustsson. And then in the end, we'll do a schedule and a summary for this year. First up, I would like to thank Adabeat as our video sponsor for this first meetup. Adabeat is IT Consulting, a company where most of the developers have a background in functional programming. Adabeat is based in Stockholm, but have recently also opened an office in Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, spreading functional programming there also. If you want to support the community, please join the meetup group over at Meetup. Follow us here on YouTube and subscribe. And also check out the store, Func Prog Sweden, myspreadshop.net, where you can get a cool t-shirt like I'm having with the Meetup logo on. Yeah. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the chat. I will read it up, or the presenter will see it and will interrupt so you can get answers to your questions. With that said, let's get started. First presentation. Ben. Welcome, Ben.
Hey there.
Hey, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're warm welcome. You're coming from us all the way from Toronto.
I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really cool.
So I suppose I'll just jump in.
Do it.
So thank you for coming to Purescript for Haskellers here at Functional Programming Sweden. My name is Ben Hart. I'm the director of Cardano operations at mlabs.city. So mlabs is a Haskell and Rust consultancy focused on blockchain as well as traditional finance. We are hiring like crazy. So if you are someone who knows quite a bit about Haskell or Rust or Purescript, we're very interested to talk to you. I'm going to drop just a link to our Haskell job posting in the chat. But if you have questions, if you'd like to get in touch, we're happy to have a chat. And if you're interested in maybe moving from a hobbyist role in Haskell to a full-time position, that's absolutely on the table. Come have a chat. Come engage with myself or our hiring managers. We're happy to have a chat with you. I am Canadian, so disregard any extra U's you see. I've been doing Haskell and Purescript. I learned them simultaneously about 4 years ago. I come from a functional full-stack JS perspective, and I really strongly believe in simple Haskell as sort of at least the first line of attack on a given problem. So what are we doing today? I'm going to do a brief introduction to the Purescript language design and its origins. I'm going to live code a project setup, a hello world, and then we're going to do some DOM manipulation, FFI to JavaScript, and some opaque types work as well. You're welcome to follow along. It's set up in such a way that you might be able to. On the other hand, if you're more happy just watching and asking questions as you go, that's just fine too. All right. So JavaScript, this might be controversial, is actually pretty great at times. It does run anywhere. it seems to be all okay at doing its job without nix. It's one of the best funded interpreters on earth. There's so much money that goes into just making JavaScript more and more efficient over time. It does have first-class functions, even though it doesn't have a type system. It's an incredibly well-maintained ecosystem for a ton of common tasks. So NPM, for all of its faults, at least if you're looking to get a job done, there's usually a package that can help you, and it might even do it, reasonably correctly. It does work on the front and back end, and it has this really convenient thing for web integrations in particular, which is anonymous records. It has anonymous objects without a particular type. JavaScript is also terrible. I think this is less controversial. There's no types. There's not a lot of correctness guarantees when you write a function. You don't have monads unless you're working in sort of a particular subculture of libraries, but they're pretty good, the ones that exist. I really, really like Sanctuary.js and Ramda, and they actually all come from a bunch of Haskellers who were working in JavaScript and saw potential for something better right around the time that the JavaScript promise was released. It's a really interesting read if you want to go take a look at those threads. Major refactors are pretty hopeless in JavaScript because you can only get type errors at runtime. And it does have something like 4 or 5 different types of null. So Haskell, on the other hand, I think this is pretty uncontroversial, at least in this crowd, is it's pretty great. We have all of the types and functions we could really ask for unless we want to reach out to Idris and get dependent types. You have all kinds of abstractions with correctness guarantees. It's probably got the most advanced testing ecosystem out there, and you do get provable behavior out of your programs. But Haskell has some pretty terrible aspects. There's multiple types of string. The list is available in Prelude, and it has performance issues. It has some unreliable maintenance on vital libraries. There can be a level where you're doing type level work and very few people can maintain it, even among experienced Haskellers. You end up in this world where everybody's using a slightly different version between all of the different pragmas that you can enable. I would say there's build system issues just in general, and there's a lot of sort of unsafe functions in base that mean we just can't have nice things. So there's a ton of issues with Haskell, and there's what I would call is it's really cruft. It's things that we're married to mostly for backwards compatibility, and if we could do it all again, we would probably do it just a little bit differently. So I think there's some synergies here. Purescript attempts to provide a type-safe Haskell-like language. It has type classes, it has most of the features of Haskell, and it compiles down to high compatibility JavaScript. So it actually compiles down to JS version 3, if I recall. So you can use simple FFI bindings and row types, as you'll see, to sort of get into anonymous records and start to build up a more natural way to program in both front and back end web. Purescript is generally more demanding of its users, though. It's more polymorphic, for example. So from foldable is used for collections rather than from list. And this can create some real problems because your compiler has less information sometimes. So this means that things like type tools are a little bit less useful than they would be in Haskell. But we don't have any pragmas. That means the compiler is much easier to maintain. And in fact, it is maintained by a far smaller group of people than GHC is. It's got its default head function actually returns a maybe. And in fact, the whole language is sort of taking a page from Idris. It's total by default. Now, if you need to introduce a partial function for, say, a partial pattern match, you can do it. The compiler will catch you, and you have to add this partial type class to your function to make it possible. You do have JSON and foreign parsing to get up from sort of untrusted JavaScript types into trusted Purescript types. Hating algebra is interesting. So hating algebra is just an abstraction over Booleans, really. I mean, you can be more abstract about it, but this is a good example where It's more about things that are Boolean-like. So these can be maybe bools or functions that return a bool, and you can get the composition that you're looking for using or and then these simple methods that you would usually just use monomorphically on Booleans. So you get row types and anonymous records, and this is kind of what that looks like. So we have dot access, very similar to the dot preprocessor, but your type here is actually some record which contains a property named prop at the type of A, and then you can get your A out. This means that there's other rows. So this is a row type. It's and it will accept an anonymous record or any record that would fit this shape. Records are a standalone type in Purescript. So if you want a new type over a record, the constructor just takes sort of the whole record as an argument. Okay. And you have FFI and native Purescript function frameworks as well. So you can use something like Halogen, which is entirely written in Purescript using free monads, and you get all of the type safety. It's an incredibly type safe library. Or if you want to opt for something like React, there's absolutely multiple versions of React bindings available in Purescript. And I will say in general that the entire ecosystem is really geared for production. More improvements. Well, you can have symbolic inline functions just like you might have in Haskell, but they require a name. So you're not stuck with everybody trying to understand how to pronounce a certain symbol. And I think it makes understanding and reading code much easier. Linting is built into the compiler, so there's a lot more warnings that give you recommendations. In particular, I'm a really, really big fan of what they do with imports, where you can have one unqualified import. Usually it's your prelude. You don't get implicit prelude, by the way. You manually say what prelude you want to use. And then everything else is either brought in under a qualifier or as just named imports. So it's very, very explicit about what's happening in the module and where everything comes from if you follow those linting rules. You do also get generic implementations for free out of a ton of type classes, including show. So the compiler will derive generic for you for almost anything that you can think of. And then you can go ahead and use sort of generic show implementations or generic implementations of almost any type class you would look for. And since we're using sort of the underlying JavaScript representation as generic, it's a little bit more performant, certainly at compile time, than you will ever see from the GHC generic as well. Maybe a little bit closer to like generics SOP. There's also this function in the debug library called spy, which is really handy because it lets you see things that aren't showable. So it's really great for debugging. And you can also have flexible backends, so you're not limited to JavaScript. Purescript works directly by working, it can compile down into things like C++ or C directly. And so you could theoretically build up a set of packages for compiling Purescript to WASM, for example. You do get some compromises in Purescript. It's not super performant when wiring up JavaScript libraries. If you're doing a lot of work in Purescript, that code will run a little bit slower than if you wrote it in bare JavaScript or TypeScript. Your foot guns are with the FFI. Those types are trusted. There's sort of a handshake when you do the foreign function interface. With JavaScript, you have to make sure your type is accurate. Sometimes you could have the wrong underlying type. Purescript is going to trust it. It is strictly evaluated, but writer doesn't have a space leak. Compilations, they roll in your dependencies so that you can actually cause excessive bundle sizes, and you'll have to go and minimize your work afterwards. And there are some unmained tools, and I'm pointing here directly to Purescript Bridge. It's not maintained. There's a billion forks of it. Find a good fork, though, because it's really, really powerful. It lets you take Haskell types and share them with a Purescript library, essentially. So it'll generate a Purescript module with all of your Haskell types and correspondingly equivalent encoding and decoding for Java, JSON, for example. But your type tools are, as I mentioned before, a little bit less informative than you would see in GHC. So you get some familiar friends out of the box. We get Pursuit, which I'll flip over to. Pursuit is an awful lot like Google, and you can see it's got a ton of packages. It's a really mature library of packages, I think. Lots of wrappers for common JavaScript libraries, as well as re-implementations of a lot of friends that you would be looking for in Haskell. So your list and set implementations, they're all here, and they actually have pretty good performance properties for those data structures as well. All right. You can easily pull in an NPM library as well and wrap it if you want, if you're confident with that library. You get Spago, which works a bit like Stack, so it manages packages and sets that are known to be compatible with each other. You do get PSCID and PSCIDE, which are tools for interacting with the code itself and getting rapid iteration. You do have a quick check port as well. You get a dedicated team of maintainers who really care about production usage. And instead of IO, you get this sort of effect and AF monad. So these are synchronous and asynchronous effects, respectively. So in one, for asynchronicity, you would use like continuation passing, callbacks. And in the other, you'll have something more like IO in Haskell. Yeah. And it's easy to go from one to the other. All right, so at this point, I'm going to jump into actually doing some live coding, but I'd like to take a moment if there's any questions. I don't see any in the chat. Do we take verbal questions? I'm not sure.
No, we don't.
All right.
I don't see any questions, and I don't have any questions. No. I have one question.
So we're going to jump in and actually start a project then. Yeah. I have already gone ahead and installed Node and NPM, but I really recommend this tool if you're not used to working with Node, to use the Node version manager, at least until maybe if you're a Nix expert, you want to go and get it set up in Nix, or if you're using Nix OS, this might be a bit of a blocker. But I would recommend, if you're not going to use Nix and only Nix, go ahead and use the Node version manager. I recommend this one. I believe it's the current LTS version of Node. Then you'll want to install Purescript itself, Purescript PSA, which makes the error messages slightly better, and Spago. And I really recommend PSCID, especially if you like the GHCID. They're really meant to be very similar applications. Okay, so I'm just going to switch over to my sort of coding workspace, and we're going to see just sort of setting up a project and getting to a basic hello world, and then we're going to move into a browser. Okay, so I'm going to just make, we'll call this like my project. Okay, so we're in an empty directory, and we can just do Spago init. And I will show you what that looks like. We'll just get a second terminal up. Okay, so we have a spago.dal. This defines the dependencies for your package and gives some additional information about how your package should be built by Spago. Okay. Then you have the packages.dal, and packages.dal defines your package set. So here we're actually linking to an upstream package set, and we can add in overrides and additions to that package set as well. So if you want a particular version of a package or a package that's unlisted, you can specify that all in DAL. So the whole ecosystem is really geared around DAL-based configuration. So we have a main.pers, and it has an effect function similar to IO, and it's going to log out a bowl of spaghetti. So we can do spago build. And after some compilation, we get a successful build. Spago run, we'll just always run main.main. And we get our little bowl of spaghetti down here in the corner. All right, so at this point, we've got a really basic sort of hello world. But what we want to do is we'd like this to run in the browser. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to guide the next couple steps where we actually walk through getting this set up in the browser. So we've already passed everything here. You can also do like to run tests, you can have spago run main, and then you specify your main functions. Here we go. So we're going to do a hello world in the browser. And the first thing that you'll want to do is grab some boilerplate that's in the spago docs. So I'm just going to say like, GitHub spago. Just go grab that. And you'll even see they have sort of in their table of contents, they'll talk about the super easy, super quick tutorial. And then down a little ways, they'll say, okay, I want to set up a project into a single JS file, or we want to set up like a browser or node based project. So upgrade package set. Oh, make a project with Purescript and JavaScript. Here's what we want. And I would really recommend Parcel. There is also some settings for Webpack, but Webpack is a much, much more complex build tool. Parcel will definitely get you up and going, and it is just fine even for some large projects. So we've got the super quick tutorial down. We can initialize a JavaScript project. And so you'll see we get this sort of situation where we have 2 layers of build system. So we'll do npm init as well. Package is my project. There's a few things npm wants to know. I'll just kind of skip those. Yes. And we have our, I'll just kind of renew it up here as well. Package.json added. Okay. Flipping back, the next step is we're going to install Parcel. And it's good to do it as a development time dependency. So Parcel's going to download. So Parcel is a bundler. It's going to take our compiled output from Spago, from the Purescript compiler, and it's going to bundle it up with some JavaScript target so that it can be incorporated, say a bunch of different JavaScript modules as sort of a single JavaScript module that we can tie up to a web page. While that is coming in, we are going to add 2 files. One is a main.js or an index.js, and the other is just a piece of HTML. I'll grab the HTML first here. Okay, this is going to be index.html. And we will also grab this. So all this piece of JavaScript does at this point is it imports from our output folder our main module and then calls the main function. That's all it does. And this will be index.js. Helps if I actually copy it. There we go. Okay. So the next thing that we'll want to do once we have these is we just want to add a extra script to our package.json. For those of you who might be new to sort of the NPM ecosystem, this works a little bit like a makefile, you might say. So here we're defining scripts, and the nice thing about them is they are scoped to include our specific dependencies. So some people might not just use Parcel for this. They might also actually bundle the precise version of their Purescript compiler here in your NPM package so that it's giving you the correct versions everywhere. You can also build up a makefile, of course. That's fine too. That's better if you're using like Nix, I think. Okay, so here we should be able to say npm run dev. Couldn't read, get report of undefined. You know what I think this is? I think this is actually I can see that my node version has regressed. So I'm just going to say nvm use 14.17.3 to get onto the correct version. That should be just fine. Yeah, there we go. So Parcel is going to put that up at localhost 1234. And Parcel, you can see here, is pointed directly at our index.html. So it sort of recursively sees, oh, there's a JavaScript dependency. It pulls in index.js. And then it sees index.js pulling in all of our output files. So it bundles those up for us too. Heading back over to our browser, we should be able to now visit our page. And we're not doing any HTML yet. It's an empty page, but we should be able to see our app actually started. So starting app, that's from our boilerplate index.js. And then here's our little piece of spaghetti. So we've now got a Purescript project working in the browser. And we're able now to start interacting with browser APIs. And so that's sort of the next step here. We could easily change the spaghetti to hello world, and we would have hello world. One nice thing about Parcel actually is, and I'll maybe get this running. Now that I've got it, I'm just going to send that off to another workspace in Linux, and I'll set up a new terminal. So what I can do now is I can run pscid, and I can start to make live changes, and they should be reflected in my web page. So it's all hot reloading. Let's come here. So we can do that. We can say, all right, I don't want spaghetti anymore. I want hello world. So you can see that responded automatically, and I'm pretty sure our bundler would have reloaded. Let's go take a look. Yeah, now it says hello world. So that is how we get hot reloading in the browser from Purescript, which is just a tremendous way to get more productive when you're doing front-end work, I find. Okay, so the next step here is we're going to actually start implementing some DOM manipulation. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm going to assume we're going to hold off on any questions until the end. So we're going to jump straight into DOM manipulation. So for those of you who are new to working in the browser, DOM stands for Document Object Model, and what we're talking about when we mean DOM manipulation, we're just going to put something on the page, and in this case, we're going to use a div element. So I'm going to assume that there's some general familiarity with HTML. So the DOM manipulation would be anything that you can do to interact with HTML at runtime, inserting objects into it, removing them, anything that applies there. So we're going to use FFI to do this. I'm not going to bring in a dependency that already does it. We're going to use native browser APIs. So we kind of are going to want to work with some kind of an HTML type. We could build up complex types where we know the internals, but what I find is a quite useful technique to get started and sometimes to go right to production is to use an opaque type. So we're going to talk about some HTML. We're not going to provide a constructor, but what we're going to provide are some JavaScript functions that return some HTML, and that's going to be our type. That the only way to get it is sort of through JavaScript smart construction. So let's talk about sort of the first thing that we want ultimately is sort of a foreign import of, let's call it like append string to document. Okay, and we can decompose this a bit, but let's just say we want to put a string onto the document. So maybe what we want is string to effect HTML, and it is an effect simply because it's going to allocate memory, even if we're not attaching it to the document itself or we're not putting it on the page. There's an allocation of memory to go get this this node that is, it's sort of existing in the page, and it can cause a memory leak if you don't get rid of it. So it's a good idea to actually have an effect for, I would say, most of your JavaScript functions. The other thing is you might throw an error, and I think that's part of the contract here when you're dealing with FFI, especially DOM manipulation. Your DOM manipulation can fail. You could supply some kind of invalid string, perhaps. So these are the reasons why we're going to label this as an effect. So again, sort of analogous to I/O. Let's see, the foreign module implementation is missing. Well, that makes sense. We haven't made one. So Purescript looks for a foreign module just to have the same name as the Purescript module that imports it. So in this case, we want like a main.js. Okay, so we have a main.js file now. What do we want to put here? Well, we want this sort of exports. I'm just gonna bring this down a few lines so it's probably easier to see. But exports dot, let's see, what did we call that? Append string to document. There it is. And let's see, we're going to use arrow functions in JavaScript here. So all we're going to do is we're going to take a string, and in effect, in Purescript, there's no wrapper or anything. It's just a function that takes no argument. And now we have, so this is currying in arrow functions. And now we can actually start a function body. Okay. So if you're used to sort of an older JavaScript syntax, you might have used like the function keyword. So it would be a function that in turn returns another function that takes a unit or an empty set of parentheses here. And then we're finally getting into the active part of the function. We've gotten past any currying. Okay, now this is going to take a string. So the first part of this is we'll need like something from window.document.create text node. And if you're wondering where to get resources on this, I really recommend MDN is a really great resource for any browser API. I am working sort of directly from this JavaScript manipulation tutorial from Tutorial Republic, but this information is out there many dozens of times in JavaScript. So here we're creating a text node with our string, and then we're going to sort of apply that to a div that we'll create. All right, so we've got this text node. So we'll just call that text. We can make it a const. Okay. Add some spacing in there. Okay. So the next thing that we'll want is some div. So we'll say even const div window.document.create element, I believe. And this is just a fixed div. And you could absolutely create sort of more complicated abstractions here where you're maybe supplying like the type as a string down into the foreign function call. There's lots of things you can do here. Okay, so we've got the div, we've got the text node, and so the next thing that we'll want to do is append the child. First to the div, and then eventually to the document.body itself. We'll do that in a separate function. So let's say div.append child tx. And then we'll return the div. So we are returning a value. It is an HTML value. It just happens to be this div. Nope. There we go. Okay. So now it's no longer grumpy that we do not have a correct way of doing this foreign function interface. It found the file. And it just matches up the name here. To your export list in this file. Okay, so it happened to find everything it needs, and it trusts that our string to effect HTML is consistent here. I'll often like do a little comment that will even say like what the type is. I'll even do the type signature in the JS, just so that it's clear if you're changing this, then you're breaking a handshake. But that is sort of the most guarantee you can get out of the box. There are also libraries that can help you enforce runtime type safety as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that. So I'm just going to say here div is equal to append string to document hello world. I might just rename this because it's really append string to div. We're not adding it to the document just yet. There we go. And it helps if I save my changes in both files. Right. And what we're looking for here is a bind arrow, and just to make the type checker happy, we'll need to use pure unit. So you might be familiar that pure is the same as return. However, you may not be used to seeing unit spelled out. So again, everything has a sort of different value here. In terms of, we're not just using the empty brackets as a symbol like this. It has a name, and in fact, the empty brackets doesn't actually mean unit in Purescript. It means an empty record, you can think of it, or the empty row, so to speak. So it means something distinctly different in Purescript than it does in Haskell, which is why we have this typed type, this written type unit, as opposed to a symbol, and why we have the term level unit as well. For very similar reasons, true and false are also lowercase in Purescript. All right, it's happy at the type checking level. It's just grumpy because we haven't used div yet. So that's going to be our next mission, is let's take another foreign import. And we'll call this append HTML to body. So this is going to take HTML as an argument, and it's going to have an effect that ultimately returns nothing. Yeah. And now it is once again mad that we have not got the other aspect of the foreign functions fixed. So we need to add another function here. Exports dot append HTML to body equals, we'll just call it HTML. Again, we're creating an effect, so we throw in an extra curried function. And all this is, I think, is going to be window.document. They're fine with just document. I think that should work just fine. So document, it really does exist on the window object, but that's fine. JavaScript can figure that out. And document.append child any HTML that we give it. And we don't need to return anything because we're returning unit. Okay, and then over here, we'll just do the appending. So append HTML to body with the div. That should all type check. It's mad because we're not using log. I will just get rid of log. And whenever you see the owls on PSCID, that means compilation was successful, which means the compilation output was probably picked up by parcel. And so I'm going to take a look and see if we actually have, maybe with a reload, oh, we actually have an error to fix. This is why we might want to have it as an effect. Only one element on document allowed. Oh, we didn't apply it to the body of the document. We only applied it to the document itself. So let's just go in and fix that. Body. And I'm just going to do a rebuild just to make sure it gets picked up. Do a reload. Hey, and we got our hello world on the DOM. So that's kind of a quick overview of working with the DOM from Purescript. I wouldn't necessarily say working with the DOM is something that everyone needs to know about Purescript, but I think that it's a really elegant way of describing foreign function interfaces and just sort of getting a brief idea of how concepts in PureScript might relate to concepts in JavaScript. All right, so that concludes the talk. This should give everyone a pretty good idea of sort of the bare basics of PureScript. I do want to do maybe a follow-up talk. I don't know if it'll be here or elsewhere, but talking about asynchronous work across both languages, JavaScript and PureScript. I'm actually pitching it to PureConf, so I think that's next month. So you might be able to catch me at PureConf as well. All right. Any questions?
Not not so far. People are sharing. People are saying this tutorial is making me happy. Woo! Was really
Cool.
nice, and really nice hello world also. the standard message.
Yeah, I've realized I have the Zoom chat up. I don't actually have the YouTube chat up.
Oh.
So I may have missed any questions that came up. So
Yeah,
I apologize, but
no questions so far, Ben.
Yeah, I really recommend for anyone who's looking to get started, do take a look at the Spago docs. I think they're kind of one of the best entry points to PureScript. Another great place to look, although it may be slightly out of date and only slightly, is a great book by the actual developer of PureScript itself. The book is called Learn PureScript by Example, and it shows you sort of snippets of PureScript and then the JavaScript and Haskell equivalents. So I think that's really worth a read if you're interested in PureScript. It certainly helped me a lot. One other place I'll direct viewers to is the project Real World Halogen. I'll write it out somewhere, maybe over here. Q to exit. Real World Halogen. Or maybe I'll just bring it up. Real World Halogen is Real World Halogen is a really, really well documented GitHub project and sort of a book that describes how to build a sort of re-implementation of the Medium blogging platform in PureScript. So you get to see a really principled front-end design using native Halogen component systems that's sort of a similar to React, but built with more type safety for building up a front end in nothing but PureScript. And it uses, I think, monad transformers really effectively, and it's heavily, heavily commented. So I really recommend taking a look here. And if I can find the GitHub, yeah, this is how I learned PureScript, and an awful lot about monad transformers, if I'm honest. So you can go right through the source. So we can go through components, perhaps, and you can see like pretty much every file. You get just a ton of comments. Like just there's almost as many lines of comments telling you what a function does as the actual functions themselves. So if I go to the PureScript, there's a pretty good amount of comments throughout the entire. Let's do like an article list. I don't know. I use this as a pretty great way to learn the system, and he does some pretty amazing things with codexes as well. So setting up sort of type safe page routing for like single page apps, building up real web apps with PureScript. It's a really great resource. All right. I think that's everything I have to say. Any other questions coming from YouTube?
No, Ben. No questions.
All right.
I have a question.
Sure.
You said you're looking for people. Are you looking for people in Canada, or is it like anywhere in the world, or remote, or how does it?
Anywhere in the world. We are
anywhere
a
in the
fully
world.
remote company.
Cool.
We don't have an office anywhere.
Ooh.
Sometimes we get together for fun. But in general, like we have 3 or 4 employees here in Toronto. We have I think close to a dozen employees in the UK. We have people all across mainland Europe and people on every single continent. So
Cool.
if you're interested, if you're a Haskeller, like your relative time zone or country is generally not a concern.
Cool. Next question. I have a question. How did you start to learn Haskell? When did you learn it?
Well, I came to it through JavaScript. So in JavaScript, there's a really great YouTube community out there, Function, which focused initially on just functional programming concepts. So that was very helpful to me as a JavaScripter. And they sort of alluded to this Haskell thing that was a mysterious and dark art that might be difficult to learn. And so in a day of frustration, I decided I wanted to learn the least employable thing ever. And so I started learning Haskell, and it really ramped my career up. In fact, I have to say Haskell's extremely employable right now, in a way I did not anticipate.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's my personal story of what brought me to Haskell was actually frustration learning and working with PHP and Solidity and some of these other less than ideal languages, I would say.
Cool. Checking if there's more questions. No more questions. Then thanks again, Ben, for coming. Thank you very much for your talk. And we'll post the links.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Send over the links you want to post, and we'll dump it below the video once we're done.
Yeah, I'll just, as I stop screen sharing here, I'll jump onto the video myself, and I'll post it in there.
Good.
Great.
So people can find you and find your next talk also at the, what did you say, Pure Conference, or sorry for missing?
Yeah, Pure Conf. I'll drop the link there as well in the
chat.
Just once I jump off. Great.
Cool. Thank you very much, Ben.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, you're welcome.